inhabited from a time before the Earth was destroyed, at least 2 times. And they even talk about how one of the destructions was caused by a small moonlet that the Earth had, and it had 2 at this early point. They had been decaying in their orbit. This is before the moon that we know, Luna, had been, as they say, captured.
Right.
This sort of thing is so astounding and strange that you realize that most chroniclers and most historians are going to just put it off as just plain myth. But Arthur Poznański, and maybe the century before this one, spent several decades looking at the area and actually doing tests of the geology there and the geography and talking to the locals. And he found that when he was doing some excavations over of Tiahuanaco, he found that the detritus that was laid over that area was indeed laid down by in the Pleistocene era, and that there was actually incumbent layers of this detritus that held seashells and marine fossils, and underneath that, lignite of ash and charcoal, and evidence of a great immolation or conflagration of the area. Something so horrific that it seared the ground. But this actually fits into what the Spanish chroniclers picked up from some of the Inca priests of the area, that the area had been completely destroyed, not just by water, but also by fire, and that the great god Viracocha had created all humanity from that point, and from Lake Titicaca itself, and that the actual city of Tiahuanaco was incredibly advanced, akin to what Plato had written about Atlantis, and that it had been built in only one night. And that when it was built, it was actually built to somehow commemorate the race that was soon to be destroyed by this moon that was coming into, it had reached its Roche limit, and it was fragmenting and was coming into burn up in the atmosphere. What's really interesting is that one of the translations of Tiahuanaco itself is City of the Moon. And the huge stone ashlar that sits at the temple there has many of these embossed reliefs on its surface, and Poznański thinks was a calendar, actually tells the same tale of this moon crashing into the Earth and the capture of the other great moon we have now, and that there was a great flood, and that there must have been a period of incredible uplift of the Andean range at the time this thing was built, because what Arthur Poznański also discovered was that Lake Titicaca was not just an inlet lake. It's one of the highest lakes in the world. It's certainly the highest navigable lake in the world, but it has seahorses in it. The fish that actually don't survive in fresh water at all. They somehow adapted to this fresh water environment. And what he thought was that the area had actually been at one time at sea level, and that Lake Titicaca was just an inlet. But what's also interesting about that is that just a few meters away is a place called Pumapunco, where there are huge andesite blocks that are laid out in the pattern of a wharf, and that they were once for docking ships. Now they're covered with almost 6 feet of sediment. So Poznański put all this together and wrote his books on this area, and was pretty much summarily dismissed in the academic circles. But now you look with satellite maps at the area, and you find that not only what he was talking about is verifiable, because you can see the geology of the area, you find these anomalous geoglyphs that are so extensive and so architecturally almost impossible to achieve when you think of the altitude that the place is at now. And it has been since the Pleistocene era, 13,000 And if you combine that with what Poznański was saying and the chronicles of the area from the Inca and the pre-Inca, you realize that you're seeing something that is extraordinary, and its significance is far beyond what most people right now, I think, can actually piece together, because there's so little information on this phenomena.
And if we were to talk a little bit about some of the and definitely I recommend people to check out the article again, where you can find the images of what David is talking about here. Google screen captures basically, but also what you can do is actually that you go on Google Earth and you actually search for Tiahuanaco, or you can even link up from a place mark, and I can have this up on the website too. This is a GMC file, and you can just click on this, and this will take you directly to this location that David is talking about, so you actually can fly around the area and take a look for yourself there, and that's a really incredible part about this. But I mean, what we see there is basically, as you mentioned, is like a myriad of very intricate lines. Some look like perfect squares, some are rectangles. We even find circles. Do you know at this point how big some of these lines are? I mean, what when we're looking upon this here, are we talking about several 100 meters, or just a few meters each? Do we know, David?
Yeah, you can actually measure them with some of the applications on Google Earth. In the images that I captured and subsequently put in an article that was on Reuters News Update, and also in UFO magazine, I think in the June-July issue that came out. You can actually see a superimposed 747, which I put in this. This is about 250 feet long. And it's superimposed for scale. You can find whole hillsides that have had rock removed in these strange sort of labyrinth-like patterns. Mm-hmm. They don't run horizontally along the sides of these mountains. In many cases, they run vertically, perpendicularly. Sometimes there's these weird sort of rectilinear cells that are on the mountainsides. And they're all packed together. But when you see, you can actually see the superimposed 747, you can see that it can actually fit into some of these rectilinear shapes. And sometimes it'll take a couple 747s to actually fit into these shapes. So we're talking about millions of tons of rock that has been removed, and an extensiveness that would require architecture and surveying and deliberation of many centuries. But if you're thinking about a human agency actually having created it, that would make sense. When Pizarro came into the area with his conquistadors, and actually was able to have some of the priests chronicle what the Incas said about at least Tiahuanaco, the legends all stated that the area had been produced for a legacy of a race that was soon to be destroyed, and that it had been created incredibly quickly. And by means that were not conventional at all. So these things are what the chroniclers say, and they also say other astounding things, like there were several different races of people, and the farther back you go, the races of people become races of something else, humanoid, but not exactly human.
Yeah.
And that's what Poznański actually realized, too, when he was excavating Tiahuanaco. He uncovered skeletons that were incredibly anomalous. Skulls that had cranial capacities up to 3 times larger than modern men.
That is incredible.
Fossilized.
Huh, wow.
And they still actually exist in the museum in La Paz.
Yeah. So,
and I think David Hatcher Childress, who's also chronicled much about Tiahuanaco and other megalithic sites on the Earth, had actually captured some images of these anomalous skulls. He actually called them the cone heads of Bolivia.
Right.
But that's what they look like. They have these incredible craniums that come to points, and the cranial mass is sometimes up to 3 sizes of modern men. You can't create that sort of thing with binding of the skull, which is really common in the Americas with the ancient Indians. And then sometimes, actually,